Okay, good Rosh Chodesh, Adar Beis. Today's theme will be a theme that grows out of both our Parsha and Megillas Esther. You have Megillas Esther's in front of you. Our Parsha is Parshas Pekudei. What's it about? It's about the Mishkan. It's about the Big Day Kahuna, the clothes of the Kohanim and the Leviim, their outfits. It's about the vessels, the Kalim in the Beis HaMikdash, correct? The Mikdash, or the Mishkan, if it had to be called, if it had to accomplish one task, what was the purpose of the Mishkan? And why, therefore, are there so many rules that have to be meticulously adhered to so that the Mishkan retains its status? What is the status of the Mishkan? The Shekhinah dwells there. And therefore it's it's a Makom Kadosh. It is a holy place. Holy means mufrash. It is separated from the world. It is uncontaminated. It is pure. Nothing that's impure is allowed to encroach on the Mishkan. All forms of impurity that a person himself can be affected by must be eliminated before a person enters the Mishkan, correct? Everything has to be made in a state of purity. It's eventually made for purpose of purity, and eventually it's initiated in purity. Everybody who enters is pure. It is entirely removed. It's a place among the nation on this world, but not of this world. Not entirely. It's all about purity. In the Purim story, there is no more Mikdash, there is no more Mishkan. The Jews are living among the exiles. The belly of the beast of impurity is the palace. Remember when we took down Saddam Hussein and they found his two sons? Remember that how they lived, what their palace looked like? The deepest rotten core of impurity and immorality is in the palace of Persia. This is where the story unfolds. This is where our leaders, our saviors operate, in the depths of impurity. There is no luxury in the palace in Shushan for purity. Very, very minimal. Okay, that's a reality. So we're going to be comparing purity and impurity and the opportunity to live in purity and the requirement sometimes to enter the world of impurity and how that works. We're going to start off with thinking about Purim. Purim is a day that we celebrate with parties, rejoicing, holiday, celebration, happiness. The mitzvahs are reading the Megillah. Sometimes after Haman is hanged, everybody loses attention. The most important part is after the hanging of Haman. We're going to focus on it carefully today. That's where the essence of Purim comes in. Then we have a Suda, and we have two mitzvahs that clearly are designed to encourage achdus and love and camaraderie and integration and interwoven interdependent, matanos levyonim and mishloach manos. The question is, what are we celebrating on Purim? Look in your Megillah. The Jews are celebrating. Start with page. Turn to the Megillah and you could turn to Perek Tes. Okay. All right. Look at Perek Tes. Okay, what are we celebrating? We're celebrating. We don't talk about celebration after Haman is we talk about the happy Mordechai got Haman's estate. Turn to the bottom of page 24. Okay, we are in Perek Ches, Pasuk Tesvav 8:15. Ches. We're starting with Ches. Okay, Haman has just been hanged. Okay, Mordechai has gotten his estate. He becomes extremely powerful. Pasuk 15 is Mordechai yatsa milifnei hamelech b'levush malchut. He's very powerful. Okay? And the Jews are relieved. Haman is hanged, and Mordechai has become politically powerful, and they were rejoicing with Ora, v'simcha, v'sason, v'yikar. Okay? Now, eventually we're going to read the beginning of Perek Tes. Perek Tes tells us that what happens now? What happens now? Read Tes till the hanging of the 10 sons. What's this whole introductory section about? Right, let's do it here. We'll read it. 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day, when the king's command and edict were about to be enforced on that day, that the enemies of the Jews expected to prevail upon them, and it was turned about. The Jews prevailed over their adversaries. The Jews organized themselves in their cities in all the provinces of Achashverosh to send forth hand against those who sought their hurt, and no man could stand before them, for fear of them had fallen upon all the peoples. And all the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and for those that conduct the king's affairs, exalted the Jews for fear of Mordechai, had fallen upon them. For Mordechai was now preeminent in the royal palace. His fame was spreading throughout the provinces. And for the man Mordechai grew increasingly greater, and the Jews struck at all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, slaughtering and annihilating, and they treated their enemies as they pleased. What is going on here? What are we celebrating? We're celebrating the military victory. After the 10 sons of Haman, we kill. Esther says we want more. We want the next day in Shushan, and the fact that we fought and we won and we killed 75,000 people. That's the reason we rejoice with a Suda and Matanos Lavionim and Shalach Manos, because we slaughtered 75,000 people. That's what the Megillah says. Here's the big question. The Megillah tells us that after Haman was hanged, which was a long time, it was Pesach, it wasn't 11 months later till they killed 75,000 people. In that time, what happened, what changed in the Persian Empire? Everyone was terrified of the Jews. Mordechai had almost total power. The king was allowing the Jewish people to dictate policy. Nobody raised their head. The anti-Semites had been neutralized. They were in fear. They were hiding in the woodwork. They had no power. That's what happened when Haman was hung. So why do we need 11 months later for Mordechai to send the decrees that nevertheless, even though this is the new conditions of the condition of the situation in terms of the balance of power, the Jewish people should go out and find their enemies, the anti-Semites, and destroy them without mercy, and hang the 10 sons of Haman. And who says all of them were so evil? Just that they were his sons. That's why they hung. What is this? Is this harsh? This is harsh. Mordechai was powerful, and he applied his power, and Esther, of course, together, and this is what they did. And today, from the Western perspective, where we are so conditioned to believe in non-violent ways of resolving problems, we look at this, some people feel very alienated, like what, this was ancient, this was how it was done in the olden days, but we've advanced, and we would never do such things, and this is so impure, and unnecessary to take a human life, especially one that's not threatening you anymore. For what purpose? For power, to consolidate your power, to make it clear that don't even think about starting up with the Jews again, which it did accomplish for a while, for a good long while, by the way. That's the question. The question is that the Jewish people, a human being, deals with a couple of realities, a couple of drives, two basic drives within them that come into tremendous conflict when power is involved. Our Parsha teaches us about Kedusha. Our Megillah teaches us, essentially, and we'll deal with the question of the war, about preserving a moral people that do not deserve to be eradicated, establishing morality in the world, destroying the haters, anti-Semitism in that part of the world, and that's moral. That is a moral cause. It is a moral cause that a nation that is moral opposing a nation that is immoral deserves to survive. You need power to make sure that happens. There's a distinction between purity, morality, and when they come into conflict in the case when power is involved. What do we mean by this? What is purity? What defines a life of purity? What does a totally pure life look like? A person immersed in prayer and study, being very careful not to hear Lashon Hara that would taint them. So what do they have to do if they don't want to hear Lashon Hara? Because it will taint their purity. They have to separate, withdraw from who? Almost everybody. And they don't want to taste anything that, God forbid, might not be on the highest standards of kashrus. So what does that mean? Most people they can't eat with. Right? They can't share a lunch with. They wouldn't eat a fruit salad on a cold plate in a not kosher restaurant. Right? Or shake a woman's hand in a law firm. You won't last in a law firm, but that would infringe in their purity. And what else does a pure person do? They work on themselves constantly, introspection. What are their motives? Are they falling into the trap of self-promotion, of imposing their will upon others for their own self-interest? In other words, it's a forfeiture of power. However, we learn, Ezehu Gibor, who is strong, you conquer your will. Your will for what? Your will to overpower others. You're mevater. You're mevater. You don't pursue too much money because that could taint you. You don't stand up when somebody insults you or assaults you because you're mevater, because you'd rather not become angry and revengeful. You give it up and you're forgiving. Okay. There's a certain inner private war in that. Hidden victories, secret victories of the person's spiritual growth. But that person is not trained, is not skilled, doesn't have the capacity, or is not, comfortable with imposing self-defense, the use of power. It's the opposite. And to live in that world means you can't mingle. You don't learn the ways of the outside culture around you. You still speak Yiddish even though you came to America. Right? You preserve the holiness. You don't learn the mores and the ways of the culture. You don't know. You don't listen to the radio. You don't see what the culture, what the people in the culture are seeing. Completely removed. That's purity. On the other hand, we have, and there's a mitzvah. What's the mitzvah to be pure? Kedoshim tihiyu, be pure. On the other hand, we have another mitzvah, tzedek tirdov. You must impose what's right and what's just and what's moral in the world. You must pursue it. In order to influence a society, you have to speak their language. You have to know how they think. You have to be smarter and have better techniques. You have to have influence. Influence comes with making alliances with maybe people that are not perfect. Influence comes with often wealth, making money, being a power broker, being able to give other people the opportunity for power. That's what having an influence in the society beyond your own involves. When my grandfather came to this country, he knew immediately that he needed to be relevant to the American Jewish community, especially the youth. The first thing he did is he hired an oratory teacher, how to speak, and he listened to Winston Churchill for hours on the radio. In fact, his teacher, who was even not Jewish, was so impressed with him, she eventually started coming to all his sermons on Shabbos in the shul to hear him speak.
That was her nafas.
It's her nafas. He spoke, he learned how to speak. Is it bittul Torah to have tutoring in oratory and listen to Winston Churchill? But there's a purpose in it, right? You have to know who you're part of. It's not conducive to purity. Not totally. You can't. You don't have the luxury of avoiding everything that's jarring and to our sensitivities and our sensibilities. You can't. You have to play the game and win at the game because you can play the game better than the other people you're competing against. To establish morality means you have opponents And you have to beat them because you're stronger. And you understand better. And you can manipulate things in your favor better. To establish morality, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, to assure, what is morality? Freedom, the rule of law, equal rights for people, okay? Security, the security that people have a right to feel secure, that you establish safety, which means squelching those forces that are that are dangerous and unsafe. What morality demands that we take care of the weak and the poor who could be taken advantage of. Morality demands that we establish contractual relations, that we can trust each other in a business deal, right? Morality demands power and influence. It means, like we said, overwhelming your opponents so that you can do something better than what's being done right now. We said purity and establishing morality could work together, but what happens is it takes power, and power is very different in both ways. A pure person has an inner power of self-control, but they don't have power to influence beyond the world outside unless somebody is very, very impressed with their lifestyle and comes to learn from them. Other than that, they don't have the power, okay? Unless somebody wants to hear what they have to say. On the other hand, to establish morality, it requires a tremendous amount of power. However, power corrupts tremendously. Power is the most corrosive force, obviously, because the difference is this. Power used to establish morality can be harsh, but it's not immoral. Power used to establish one's own self, like a dictator, power wielded for my own advancement and my own capacity to do even more of what I want and take advantage of everyone else, is immoral. We're talking about politics, power and politics. Politics don't have to be immoral, but they could easily slip into immorality. Okay? Clearly, because they deal with the impure. Wars have to be fought and innocent people have to die, period, to establish a better system where there was a worse one. It is the way it is. It's not pure. It's harsh. But it's not immoral. We have to make a distinction because the Western mind doesn't make this distinction. And the reason we don't make this distinction is because we are fortunate. We have come a long way. We have the luxury of believing that all disputes can be resolved with nonviolent methods of communication and diplomacy, rational reasoning, rational people. We always assume that nonviolent resolutions is the way and the only way. That's all true under one circumstance. When you have a society that's already completely within the framework of a certain basic understanding of the responsibilities of power. In other words, if the responsibilities of power are to, I like the way he says it here, if the responsibilities of power are to establish, and if this works, if it's successful, and we have a society, which, by the way, like in America, by and large, we have a society like this, a society that is founded on the voluntary division of labor, right? Not like, where people are imposed, where jobs and rules and tasks are imposed upon people against their will, where we have the rule of law, we have a contractual relationships where there's mutual benefit, right? In other words, it's not a dictatorship. In that situation, all conflicts can be resolved in non-violent ways because we're all on the same page, where there's an understanding of the need for everyone to succeed, of the danger of fermenting resentment because some have more rights and some have less, where there's a consciousness about this, and the leaders are attempting to establish policies that are beneficial to everyone, let everybody work together, cooperate together, and gain and advance because of each other. Yes, if that's the baseline, you can resolve disputes with nonviolent ways. Number two, that's number one. So we automatically think like that. We think, why should we not resolve our disputes with ISIS the same way? Okay? Or with the Palestinians. Let's talk to them. Okay, now, there's another misconception, that a blurring of boundaries that confuses the way we think. We all know in Western societies, now they don't know it over there in other societies, but we know it, and of course the Jewish people are the ones who promoted this idea, lo tirtzach. It is absolutely a violation of the most basic human understanding, taught or untaught, that you cannot take another's life willingly to preserve your own. You don't do that. There was a movie a number of years ago called The Life of Pi. Remember that? It was based on a true story of a court case. We have to know what it's based on so you appreciate it. It was based on a court case in England in the 1800s called Dudley versus Stevens. What happened was there was a shipwreck, and there was a lifeboat that managed to get away. On the lifeboat were 3 people, all VIPs. One was the head of the Navy, and he had a big family, and he had tremendous influence. The other one was also in the government. 3 important people, and a cabin boy named Richard Parker. Okay? They were all very important. Richard Parker was an orphan who had nobody, who went on this ship as a cabin boy living in just to seek his fortune. Nobody cared, nobody was waiting for him, he didn't play an important role in the world at all. They were 18 days without food and water. They had 1 can of turnips that they ate. They shared. After 18 days, they found the turtle and they killed it and they shared it. But eventually, and can you imagine the delirium that sets in? Eventually, Richard Parker, although they told him not to drink the seawater, drank the seawater, and he got violently ill, and he was already like in a coma. In a coma. He wasn't even alive. He wasn't even conscious, and he was going to probably die anyway if they wouldn't get rescued. Okay? They were all starving to death. They decided to pick lots that one person will sacrifice themselves to be eaten by the others. Until they realized that, why don't we just kill Richard Parker? He's like dead, and he's a nobody, and he's an orphan, and nobody cares. And his value of life is not like ours. We're important. People are waiting for us. So they did. They killed Richard Parker, and they ate him. And they were saved a few days later, 1 or 2. They got back to England. They were sentenced to be hanged. The English people revolted. They said, look, they didn't do the right thing, but you can't hang them. This is not a normal situation on being at sea for weeks without food. There was the people were right, but they put him in prison. The question, for 6 months or something, the question is, why do they deserve to be hanged? Why are they guilty? Why are they guilty? What's the morality, the Jewish morality, that was behind the conclusion that they do deserve to be hanged? But they're not gonna, because they didn't really deserve, by the way, not in their condition. A person in that state, when they're delirious, is not functioning with full judgment. But why in England did they first come to the conclusion that theoretically, under more normal circumstances, such an act would be absolutely, immoral? Why? What was their killing him based on?
They decided
Best value killing him. They decided that. Here's the nakuda. Here's the point. They have a right to live at his expense. Nobody has a right to live at someone else's expense. Now, if you come, the Gemara says, if you're in the desert, 2 people, and one brought with him his own water and the other didn't, and there's only enough water in that flask for one person, you do not have to give it away, you could drink it. That's the reality. And this had a lot of implications in the Holocaust with life and death. But On the other hand, to kill a person because I have a right to survive at the cost of him, that's completely immoral. This is true. That's true with an individual, but it is not true, and it is not a parallel with societies. It is not true that a better, more moral society has no right to survive at the expense of another society that's less moral and more detrimental to the world. That's not true. A moral society has a right, an imperative to survive when opposed by an immoral society.
Yeah, but that's very subjective.
It's not subjective.
Of course it is.
It's not subjective.
I assure you, ISIS thinks
Yes.
that they are doing the right thing.
Correct. However, we as a people, the Jewish people, the American people, know from our biblical values that we are more moral, period. And therefore we have a moral right to survive at their expense if they are a threat. There is no distinction, there is no parallel between the individual purity. Purity means I do not impose, demand to live at someone else's expense. I withdraw that power. Purity, that's part of purity. That's part of Kedusha. I withdraw the power to kill someone for myself so I can survive. That's Kedusha. But in the world at large, we're letting these societies flourish or not decisively eliminating them, which endangers moral life of good people. That's not moral. That's not moral. Okay? So when leaders have to make decisions that are decisive to ensure that morality survives, those measures are harsh. And they're not pure. Murder is never pure. And innocent people get killed, and there's a ton of collateral damage in a million ways. It's not pure, but it's not immoral. However, we have a hard time in the Western world at this point in history thinking about this violent resolution of conflicts for these two reasons. A, we have the luxury of living in a world where we can solve problems without violence. And B, we forget that just because I can't kill to save myself, that doesn't mean societies can't kill to save societies. Ours were the prophets that spoke about beating your swords into plowshares. That was us first. We spoke of non-violent resolutions to problems. The entire Yeshayahu is practically filled with it. Non-violence. Discussion, persuasion, inspiration. That's our message. And in the end of days, that is how things will look. Absolutely. And the more they look that way, the better it is. But that reality gives us the comfort of forgetting that there are cases where nonviolent solutions don't work. And back in the day, when societies had not in many ways advanced to this place of morality, equality, democracy, when they were led by dictators, and there was a force of unity all directed towards the evil will or the tool of the evil will of the dictator, there was no conversation possible. There was only one solution, as there is only one solution today in certain cases, period. Exactly. Exactly. Now, that's because those societies have not advanced themselves to be qualified and capable of solving their disputes nonviolently. They're not able to. As Israel has the perfect opponents that is exactly in this category. They're not capable of having a conversation and solving a dispute. It's a totally different set of values they have, which is murder and bloodshed and destruction, and that's it. What are you supposed to do? Now, this balance, this conflict between trying to maintain purity and the need to enter into realms that are entirely impure but not immoral creates a tremendous, inner struggle and need for balance between Kedusha, Kedoshim Tiyu, and Tzedek Tzedek Tirdof. So what do? on the one hand, our leaders, our role models, our characters in our Tanakh almost exclusively all entered into the outside world, dealt with it, tried to improve it, brought Jewish values to it, and tried to maintain their Kedusha at the same time. So, first of all, our mentality is the balance of both. We have the 6 days of the week where you gain, you work. That's power. That's influence. That's wealth. That's establishing yourself, and then there's Shabbos. We have the whole nation of Israel, and then there's the Beis HaMikdash. We have the pursuit of influence, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof, and then the withdrawal into a state of Kedusha. That's where the Chagim, you have to go to the Beis HaMikdash. So that, we have a Kohen and a Shofet. A Kohen and a Shofet. And the Shofet, or the king later, has to listen to the Navi, who keeps him, reminds him when the power that they wield in their hands might be, or could be, or is being misused, and it's not serving the causes of morality or purity, but their own purposes. So think about our characters in the Torah. Let's start with Purim, and then we'll go backwards. The palace in Persia was very impure. And if you look into the Purim stories in a sophisticated way, you get a sense of what was really going on there. Everything you want in a drama. There's intrigue and seduction and betrayal and manipulation, everything. When Esther went to Achashverosh, I hope everyone understands what that means, to seduce him. Her whole plot was to get Achashverosh insanely jealous that she's having an affair with Haman. How do you think she operated in the Persian palace? Like a Beis Yaakov girl? I don't think so. Mordechai was a statesman. Exactly. Mordechai was a master statesman. Mordechai was a politician. He worked in the palace. He out-manipulated Haman. Now, let's be true about it. Let's be true. Let's explain. It didn't happen just by politics and manipulation. There was a tremendous element here when the Jewish people had to deserve that Mordechai's maneuverings and Esther's maneuverings would outplay, would win, would eventually vanquish Haman's maneuverings. The fact that happened was because the Jewish people gave them strength. What happened was the Jewish people united. That was the call. When they realized they were all marked for annihilation, Esther said, tell them to all fast, come together, look in the Megillah, come together in their communities and fast and pray. The coming together. The coming together was not just for mystical reasons, because Achdus is show power, that all the Jewish people are united, and unity is power. And all the Jewish people united in their turning to Hashem, and then they're all going to be united in their attacking their enemies, and that's very powerful. Come together. She asked them to, what happened at Purim was, the Jewish people went from a nation that was not united, as Haman said, Yeshlo Am Echad Mefuzar Umufurad, they're all scattered. That's an indictment. We were not united, we had no power. We were all individuals doing whatever we wanted, which is why Achashverosh said, I don't need them. He had no fear of them. Kill them. I have no fear of them. Once they were united, he was afraid of the Jewish people. And that's what he said to Esther, what else do you want? After he saw that the Jewish people united and slaughtered so many people, he said, what else do you want? He suddenly was impressed. He suddenly asked her what she wanted instead of her having to ask for what, asking him for what she wanted. Power breeds, influence people like to be on the side of the powerful. So the Jewish people gathered together, well, more than that. They were in such a dire predicament, it became crystal clear that if Hashem doesn't get involved in everything, they're lost. And they did tshuva for whatever lack of kedusha they had, such as at the party, for whatever disunity they had. And they committed themselves to Torah and unity, Jewish lifestyle and unity. And that gave the extra impetus, that gave the koach, that allowed Mordechai and Esther, because Hashem would not get in the way, Hashem would allow them to be successful, to actually be successful. It's no question that they succeeded because of the power of the people. Spiritual power, unity, achdus, and they were able to outmaneuver Haman. And after they outmaneuvered Haman, and they hung him, and Mordechai got his estate, and Mordechai became head of state practically, and Esther was a Jewish queen in the palace with the king's ear. Okay, and all the anti-Semites were neutralized, and everybody was terrified. And the Megillah says, look at the Megillah, they were all converting en masse. Look what was going on. Turn to Perek Tes. Right? Pasuk Beis, Nikalu HaYehudim, the Jews all got together. Okay? You see this? Now, but to actually turn to the end of Perek Ches. Look at this. After Mordechai got power, Pasuk 17 and 18. Look at this. Ubechol medina medina, every province and every city, every place where the king's word and his decree reached, the Jews had gladness and joy in a feast and a holiday. Barabim me'amei haaretz misyahadim. Many masses of people were converting for fear of the Jews. The Jews were powerful. And everybody likes to be on the side of the winner, of the powerful person. Okay? And then after that, Mordechai said, 10 months later, when they were all cowering in fear and the Jews were definitely the dominant force, slaughter them. The reason you take decisive action is for 3 reasons. There are 2 utilitarian reasons and 1 moral reason. Decisive action is often used by a dictator for the guarantee that there will not be revenge. That's number 1. If you don't have, people can take revenge on small offenses, but they cannot take revenge anymore when there's a huge offense against them, when they're kaput. There's no revenge. So total revenge, decisive action means no revenge. Number 2, lack of extreme decisive action breeds an impression of hesitancy, weakness, encourages people to think again. That's what goes on in Israel and today with the Palestinians. Lack of decisive action encourages, emboldens them, guarantees more and more trouble. More people will die by lack of decisive action, and the wrong people will die by lack of decisive action than by decisive action. But there's a 3rd reason to take decisive action, and this is not. And the first 2 a dictator or a decent government can opt for. But the 3rd one is only in the realm of decency, or the concept of kedusha, and that is decisive action is taken to ensure the rooting of morality, what's right, what's true, what's good, what society needs, to root that into the world and eradicate the possibility of it being accosted or harmed or limited in the world. That's why decisive action is taken. That's what Mordechai does, to make sure that from this point on, there will be never again in Persia an imbalance between immorality and morality. To make it very, very clear.
Can I play the devil's advocate?
Hold on 1 second. I'm going to end with this idea, and then you can all play the devil's advocate. Okay? I just want to mention how we were started to speak about the palace, but let's give some other examples. We have Yaakov in Lavan's house, maintaining Kedusha in a totally corrupt environment. He outwitted Lavan. That's how he got rich. Remember that? With Hashem's help. It means Hashem blessed his devious maneuverings and encouraged him with the spotted and the speckled. Right? How about Yosef in Mitzrayim? He's called Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef HaTzadik. Why? Because he was able to maintain Kedusha. We don't mean he lived like a saint who never saw anything impure in his life. We mean that he managed to maintain some basic levels of Kedusha within that environment. That's Yosef HaTzadik. Yaakov, in the same thing. Yaakov in Lavan's house, even to some degree Lot in Sodom, managed to retain some levels of Kedusha in that environment.
He was the father of Moshiach.
Yes, the father of Mashiach. You have David HaMelech. Now, David HaMelech was constantly struggling with, this was his greatness. But he was not allowed to build the Beis HaMikdash because he spilled blood, which is impure, and that cannot be involved in the place of purity. Although it was for a good reason, and it was not immoral. It was moral, except for when he killed Uriah, which was immoral, to kill him the way he killed him. That was not right. And the Navi tells him, you killed him the wrong way. Even if he was worthy and deserved to die, he killed him the wrong way. He had him die an embarrassing death at the hands of the enemies instead of a noble death at the hands of the Sanhedrin if he was guilty. Or at least a death by his own people for a crime that he could admit he did, but to die in the battlefield the way David set it up, that was impure, and Nassan HaNavi told him immediately that was wrong, and he accepted it. But he couldn't build the Beis HaMikdash because that's retained for total purity, right? We have, as we said, we have the Kohen and the Shofet. We have all these examples of our leaders till the time of Mordechai who operate in the world because they're having influence for the good. They're not in the world of pure purity. And yet they're tzaddikim, they're called tzaddik, and their actions are correct. Now, tzaddik therefore begins to take on another definition. We often refer to tzaddik as the pure one who never is tainted by anything that's impure. That's a certain type of tzaddik. But what about Noach? Eila told us Noach is tzaddik, tamim haya b'doraso. In a generation where everyone's corrupted to maintain kedusha, that's a form of tzaddik. We always struggle between those two. We move into the world where we try to have influence to whatever degree, but we always have to ask ourselves: Is my compromising some of the kedusha for a good cause, for the right cause, or for my own self-interest? That's where the conflict comes in. And we'll end here by saying, and I'm going to take all your questions. I know it's late. I just want to end by saying this, that in the Purim story, where was the kedusha maintained so we know that when the Jewish people went ahead and slaughtered the anti-Semites, okay, they didn't do it for personal gain. Over and over the Megillah says they didn't touch the spoils. It was not for personal gain. Power wielded not for personal gain, but to establish tzedek. That's legitimate. That's moral. And that's why we celebrate. And all the mitzvahs are unity, celebration of establishing what's right in the world, having the power to fight that battle and win. That's what we celebrate. That's what we're looking forward to in the future. And that helps us understand that in ourselves, this is the issue, in ourselves, we want to have influence. The question is, for what purpose? And is there kedusha always maintained as to the best of our ability in the compromises that we have to make, and why are we making the compromises? All right, questions?
My question is,